Come on, are you set?
Yeah, I'm set.
Ready now?
Yeah,
1, 2, 3. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Chalkboard History. I wish I was in Dixie. Wait a minute. We are in Dixie.
We are indeed. Old Ripavilla.
And we are at Ripavilla, home once and for a long time to the Chairs family. We have now managed Ripavilla since 2021. We just passed the 159th anniversaries of the Battle of Spring Hill and the Battle of Franklin. It is December 5th. It is a lovely day, several weeks before Christmas. Christmas. Put the Christ back in Christmas. Is that what it is? Jesus' birth?
Yep, that's one of
the wise men, the Magi.
Everybody's gathering together in
Jolly
Bethlehem
old
to sing
St. Nicholas.
Happy birthday.
Happy.
Yep.
We should be playing Christmas music. The Chipmunks sing the 12 Days of Christmas and see if you can get through that.
That can be arranged. We can do it.
Celine Dion for Christmas music or the Chipmunks?
Chipmunks. Easy.
Nat King Cole or Frank Sinatra?
Sinatra. I like Nat King Cole. He's a very old soul. But I like Frank Sinatra.
You know Sinatra was drinking and smoking. Well,
that's exactly why I like it so much.
Well, we know Nat King Cole was smoking because that's what killed him several years after he recorded that great album. Let's see, Michael Bublé or Choice B?
Choice B. I don't even know what Choice B is.
What about if Choice B is... Well, I was going to say Perry Como, but Perry Como is pretty good.
Yeah. What
about Kenny Rogers' Christmas album or Michael Bublé?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I might have to go the gambler on that one. Like, that hurt.
All right, last choice. Neil Diamond or Bob Dylan Christmas album?
I think a Bob Dylan Christmas album would be great.
I love Dylan, but listening to him singing, like, "Oh Little Town of Bethlehem" is just torture.
It's too hard to do.
All right, so I don't know what we're talking about. You apparently have a surprise.
I do have a surprise for you. I have a surprise.
Oh, all right. Sweet Jesus.
All right. I brought this all the way from the gift shop for you.
Do you at home know what this is?
No.
Why are Widow of the South?
Yeah.
That's the surprise?
I think the surprise.
That's not a surprise.
It's a surprise.
All right, what are we talking about? Widow of the South or Robert Hicks?
Widow of the South, Robert Hicks, Carnton Myths. John McGavock's
Oh
drunk.
my gosh.
That's probably my favorite.
You know, Robert, in February, it will be 2 years since he died, and he would hate that we are talking about him and he can't respond. I mean, he really always liked to have a good retort.
But he liked the book plug. So, there. All right. Tell me, what's your thoughts on Widow of the South? If you haven't noticed, I'm going to steer this episode.
You know, my thoughts on Widow of the South are I never understood when it came out in... Because, you know, it was like Widow of the South, crazy town at Carnton, like in 06 and 07. I never understood the people who just never got it. Like, they just never got the point. They were always complaining about, oh, you know, he wrote this. I was like, it's fiction.
Yeah.
Like, what part of that don't you understand?
Yeah.
But they missed the bigger picture, which was he was telling a story. And he was hoping that more people would visit, not just Carnton. Robert wanted more people to visit Franklin and to learn about what happened in late 1864.
And would you say that the book is kind of responsible for some of the, or at least the publicity around the book, maybe the readership of the book is kind of responsible for driving people to Franklin and to Carnton?
There is no question that that book, this book, that book, did more than... anything else.
What was it like before? Because you were at Carnton before. What was it like at Carnton prior to the book coming out?
Well, I mean, my experience at Carnton was only as a visitor. I can tell you, though, that I was there. See, his book came out in September of 05. So when I started in very early 06, the book hadn't really taken effect. It was sort of, Hicks's book was... at least locally, was a little bit like that band that puts out the album and it's not like immediately. It takes like 6 months. But it was crazy. I mean, there were just people coming from all over, to see Carnton, to hear about Carrie McGavock. So I know I can tell you statistically the difference was attendance over the course, and it takes years.
Right.
I mean, it doubled and tripled over the span of, a good 10-year run. And that book had a solid, like really solid 3 or 4 year run, all the way up until almost 2010.
Yeah. Well, New York Times bestseller kind of tends to get you on the map. And
Yep.
And then two, I think I only met him once, but Robert had a certain kind of like a charisma that even if you didn't want to read the book, a conversation with him convinced you that maybe you should read the book.
Robert was cut out of the old storyteller cloth. Well, first of all, Robert Hicks just loved to talk. And Robert Hicks could tell you stories about anything. And those stories, like Widow of the South, were often laced with a good bit of fiction.
Right.
But I think it's how he was raised. I think it's the world that he lived in. I think it's who he was. He was a storyteller. His, as a writer, I mean, he's a good writer, but it was his ability to talk. He once said that if he ever got in trouble, he just talked more. And that was true. If somebody ever said he was wrong or he realized he wasn't going in the right direction, he just talk even more. He would just double down and he would keep rolling. So he was a force of his own kind of nature.
So then, so far as the book, because I know this is one thing that when I hear it, it sometimes kind of bothers me because it's fiction, right? It's a fictional book. You get people that will say, well, it's about 30% accurate. It's about 70% accurate. Okay, so you went through every single page and you verified that each of these events actually happened.
You can't quantify it like that.
Right. Having only read little bits and pieces and fits and starts, it's one of those things where you read it and you go, okay, I guess I can see why people are entertained by it.
People have asked me a question, how much of it, what do you think of the book? Or the central theme of the book is what is accurate. It is a family, or in this case, the subject of the book, a person, tremendously and forever impacted by an event and a cemetery that ends up quite literally behind their house. Everything around that is, a story, a yarn, fiction, embellishments, made-up characters. But the central theme of that is very accurate.
So the book itself, right? We know, and I guess for people that maybe haven't ever read it or heard of Widow of the South, it's kind of follows the McGavock, kind of follows Carrie really in particularly. And it talks about the hospital, talks about kind of some of the soldiers that come through the home, certainly, but it also brings us to the cemetery and kind of Carrie's tie to the cemetery, maybe more emphasis placed on her than John or the children, right? But so far as the general kind of thrust of the book, you've talked about the theme being accurate. What are some of the things in the book that just kind of drive you crazy when you think about it? I think personally my favorite is that John McGavock was drunk, or it was a drunk. That's a total favorite of mine, considering he was in the Temperance Society and a bit of a teetotaler.
I don't think there's anything.
Really? Nothing.
There's nothing that really bothers me, because I saw the people who came out to take a tour, and I think I was much more interested in them being there and learning something about Franklin than some aspect of a novel.
Right.
Maybe the only thing that I answered a lot of questions about was Carrie digging up the bodies.
Right.
Well, she didn't, neither did John, and neither did Mariah Reddick. I mean, as I fleshed out in one of my books, it was a burial team that did it. But that was just a component of the book.
Right.
No, it was nothing, because
one of the yarns then.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess I was just much more in tune to the people who would show up like holding the book,
And they still do from time to time.
Right. But they were there. And if they were there and they learned something about the battle or about John Bell Hood or about, the Carter House or what had happened, that was the goal. And the book actually spawned a whole series of things that, who knows what would have happened had certain pieces not, been put together the way that they were.
And that kind of speaks to something larger then, is the book's impact certainly gets visitation up, gets people coming to the sites, gets people involved. But what about kind of some of the early reclamation efforts? Can we trace Robert to those? I mean, I guess certainly so, right? Save the Franklin's Battlefield, Franklin's Charge. All that stuff is tied back to Robert.
Well, so now this gets into an area where I think Robert would probably, again, Robert being gone, you're missing a voice, but you're also missing someone who really liked to. How do I delicately say this? Robert loved to talk about himself. Okay, he just did, because he knew his importance and he knew his role and he knew what Widow of the South had done. The reclamation efforts were the result of a coalition and group of people. Robert initially was probably the ringleader. I mean, he was the person who had the connection to Rod and Kay Heller, and they're of course descended from the McGavocks. Rod is descended from the McGavocks and his lovely wife Kay, and he have been married for many years, and they bought the Eastern Flank. What is today Eastern Flank? It was the Franklin Country Club and play center. Which as a visitor early on is like, tennis courts and golf courses next to the cemetery. So Robert was instrumental in that. I think his greatest legacy, though, isn't battlefield reclamation.
What is it?
I used to joke with him, and I would say, I don't know that people will ever fully appreciate your work and what you did until after you're gone. His greatest achievement was in helping to create the Battle of Franklin Trust. Because everything has to start somewhere. And what was spawned at Carnton was the ability to see a bigger picture. And it wasn't about a site or a person or just an event. It was about the Battle of Franklin being part of a bigger picture, and that Carnton and Carter House were part of the same story. And his legacy there. So when you then add in reclamation, visitation, and a new organization, and offering something to guests that was consistent, we're sitting at Rippavilla. I can assure you, we would not be managing. Rippavilla would not be connected to Franklin the way that it is without what had started 20 years ago, probably with a book and a person and then a group of people. And it did take a village. It took a lot of people. There was a lot of work. And I have to say, I don't talk about myself a lot, but, I've been going at this since 2006. I was there before there was a trust, and I saw what Robert was doing. And honestly, my only role early on was I believed in it. And I defended him and the book against the naysayers who, honestly, I don't think they wanted to do anything other than just what they'd been doing all along, which wasn't amounting to a whole lot.
So what's the general complaint about the book then? Because everybody that buys it, that reads it, gets it from the bookstore.
They forgot that it says a novel. That's their complaint. That Zachariah Cashwell and Carrie have this weird sort of, relation. It was fiction.
Yeah.
It's the only, actually, maybe the greatest compliment I could give this book, for whatever this is worth, is I read it. I don't read fiction. So if you could convince somebody like me to read fiction, you had achieved something. And I know I wasn't alone in that. Hicks got a lot of people to pick up that book And then they were like, we got to go to Franklin.
Yeah.
And visitation now compared to what it was back then, oh my goodness. And so when I talk about the legacy being the Battle of Franklin Trust, look at what we've done at Carter House. Look at what we've done at Ripavilla. Look at how much of the battlefield. We're still buying property and Robert's gone. That's a legacy. He actually lives on through the continuation of what we're doing right now. We're doing this, talking about him, which part of him he would hate it because he can't be involved in it.
Right.
But part of him would love it because this is what he wanted. He wanted this story to be alive, to endure. And a story, he learned this, I think, probably from the Hellers as much as anybody. Nobody cared about Carnton. It was an old house sitting in the middle of a field, is how he described it. Carter House was it. And Carter House wasn't much back in the 70s and 80s.
The tunnel.
Little few thousand people. Carnton was and is it's an equally important part of the story. And I think he learned from the Hellers that it deserved better than to be forgotten. You know, the McGavocks, you get me started on this. The McGavocks were completely forgotten. Nobody cared about them.
This is the element of surprise. I got him flat-footed.
But nobody cared about them. Nobody cared about what John and Carrie McGavock had done. And what they did was nobody else did anything like them. Because you know what they really did? They took in the bodies of almost 1,500 men. And then they took care of them. That's the book.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They lived in some way in that world until they themselves left this world. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
That's the legacy of the book. That's also, in a sense, Robert's legacy. That's where you would place it then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that he is one of those characters way before it was cool. Way before heritage tourism was a thing. Way before there was a hotel-motel tax. Way before there was a Fleming Center / Visitor Center. Way before the 150th anniversary. People like Robert Hicks were talking about why Franklin was important. That wasn't easy when hardly anybody was listening. So when you're talking to an audience of 5, you know, that takes a kind of perseverance, and he definitely had that.
Yeah. Well, that's it on my end. So
it's a great book. His other books, for whatever it's worth, I think are actually as good. But he hit this was like magic in a bottle. This was just, it was the right time. And as I look at the cover, you know what's really strange? I don't think this book would sell today.
Yeah.
The imagery, things have changed.
So he hit it at just the right time to have the design on the cover the way he did it and the text of the book the way that he did it.
I'm not sure this could have sold 10 years later.
Yeah.
It was exactly the right time. It's a lot like certain music trends. You hit it at the right time, but if you're just before it or just after it, they're like, what? Huh? This was it. This was perfect for that moment in Carnton's history and the nation's history.
There you go. There's Widow of the South.
There it is. Thanks, everybody.